They were the most beloved female duo on American television. Two working-class girls from Milwaukee who made 36 million people laugh every single week. Laverne and Shirley, Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams. For 8 seasons they were TV royalty, best friends on screen, and what seemed like best friends off screen too. But behind the studio walls of one of America's most beloved sitcoms was a story nobody was telling. Feuds that lasted decades. A secret illness hidden from even the closest castmates. A pregnancy that turned into a $20 million lawsuit. A husband who almost destroyed everything. And a friendship that shattered so completely it took 15 years to put back together. This is the real story of Laverne and Shirley. And the shocking secrets behind Lenny and Squiggy that nobody ever told you. Before we get into the drama, you need to understand just how massive this show really was. Laverne and Shirley premiered on ABC on January 27, 1976. It was a spin-off of Happy Days, created by Gary Marshall, who happened to be Penny Marshall's older brother. In its very first season, the show pulled in over 30 million viewers per episode. By its third season, it was the single most watched program on all of American television. Not just the most watched sitcom, the most watched show, period. More people tuned in to watch Laverne and Shirley every week than any news broadcast, any drama, any other comedy. At its peak, the show was pulling in 60 million viewers. That is almost 1 in every 4 Americans sitting down every Tuesday night to watch these two women chase their dreams from a basement apartment in Milwaukee. So how did it all begin? And how did Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams end up in one of the most watched shows in television history almost completely by accident? The story starts not on a TV set but in a writing room. Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams first met on a double date. They bonded immediately. Both were struggling actresses trying to make it in Hollywood. Both were funny, sharp, and completely broke. They ended up working together as comedy writers at Francis Ford Coppola's production company. Then one day Penny's brother Gary called. He needed 2 women for a 1-episode appearance on Happy Days. He described the characters as, quote, fast girls, girls who put out. Penny and Cindy thought he was describing hookers. They showed up anyway. That 1 episode aired on November 11, 1975. The response was so enormous that ABC immediately ordered a spin-off series built entirely around these 2 characters. Within weeks, Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams went from broke, struggling actresses to the stars of their own primetime network sitcom. Neither of them fully understood what had just happened. When Gary Marshall came to them with the ratings after the first episode aired and told them 36 million people had watched, Cindy Williams later said the number went completely over their heads. They had no idea what it meant. Now let us talk about Lenny and Squiggy. Because the story of how these 2 characters ended up on the show is one of the most incredible accidental success stories in television history. Michael McKean and David Lander met as freshmen at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in the mid-1960s. They developed 2 characters together over years of performing in comedy clubs and on the radio as part of a group called The Credibility Gap. The characters were originally named Lenny and Anthony. They were loud, greasy, delusional, and completely hilarious. When Laverne and Shirley was greenlit by ABC, the show's early scripts were missing something. The writers were struggling. Penny Marshall, who knew McKean and Lander from the comedy circuit, had an idea. She invited them to a party at her home with husband Rob Reiner. Knowing the show's producers would be there, she asked McKean and Lander to perform as Lenny and Anthony in front of the producers. One producer who was there later said the performance was so funny it caused physical pain in his ears. It was vulgar, outrageous, and completely unlike anything on television at the time. The producers were sold immediately. Gary Marshall called the boys the next day and offered them spots on the show. There was just one problem. McKean and Lander were not members of any actors' union. They could not legally work on a major network production. The producers solved this creatively by hiring them officially as apprentice writers. 2 weeks later, Lenny and Squiggy were standing in front of a live studio audience making America laugh. And here is the detail that makes the story even more extraordinary. The writers kept giving McKean and Lander scripts and routines to perform. But the two comedians had been playing these characters together for over a decade. They knew exactly how Lenny and Squiggy would react in any situation. They politely pushed back and asked the producers to let them write their own material for the characters. The producers agreed. From that point forward, every single Lenny and Squiggy routine that made America fall off their couches laughing was written entirely by McKean and Lander themselves. Completely improvised and organic. No studio writers involved. Just two friends who had spent years developing these characters in bars and clubs finally getting to bring them to the biggest stage in the world. The show became an instant phenomenon. By season 3, it was the #1 show in America. Lenny and Squiggy merchandise was everywhere. Dolls, lunchboxes. A full music album released in 1979 called Lenny and the Squigtones, featuring a young Christopher Guest on guitar credited as Nigel Tufnell. A name Guest would later reuse for his character in the legendary mockumentary Spinal Tap. But behind all the laughter, something was going wrong. And the cracks were about to become visible in ways that would shock the entire country. Let us talk about the feud. Because for decades the question on every Laverne and Shirley fan's mind was the same. Did Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams actually hate each other? The tabloids said yes. The rumors said yes. But the truth, as always, is far more complicated and far more interesting than any headline. Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams were genuinely close friends when the show started. They had history together. They had struggled together. They trusted each other in a way that only people who have been broke and hungry together can. But 8 years is a long time. And by the later seasons of the show, the pressures of being the two leads of the most watched program in America had taken a toll. They were different people with completely different personalities and completely different approaches to work. Marshall was casual, instinctive, improvisational. Williams was precise, prepared, detail-obsessed. These differences had made them a brilliant comedy duo on screen. Off-screen, they created friction. Penny Marshall later admitted in her memoir, "My mother was nuts," that she and Williams had been feuding on set long before the pregnancy situation that ended the show. She wrote that they were both stubborn and refused to give in. But she also wrote something far more revealing. She wrote that despite everything, she still considered Williams a special person in her life, that they had shared too much for her to feel any other way. So what actually ended Cindy Williams' time on Laverne and Shirley? The official story told by the tabloids was a feud. Power struggle. Two women who could no longer stand to be in the same room. The real story is completely different and in many ways far more shocking. In March 1982, Cindy Williams discovered she was pregnant with her first child. Her husband at the time was Bill Hudson, a musician who had been in a group called the Hudson Brothers. Williams was thrilled about the pregnancy and fully expected to continue working on the show. She had a plan. She told producers she would come back after the baby and they could hide her growing bump behind furniture. Behind benches, couches, pillows, she later told the Today Show. That was not it. What happened instead was that the show's producers presented Williams with a contract for the upcoming 8th season. And buried inside that contract was a clause that had her scheduled to work through her actual due date. The day she was supposed to give birth. She told them she could not sign it. Negotiations went back and forth for weeks. But Williams had a problem. Her husband Bill Hudson had gotten involved. And Bill Hudson had demands. He wanted to be made a producer on the show. Penny Marshall later described Hudson with brutal honesty. Bill was a pain, she said. She was having a baby. She thought he was being protective. But he wanted to be a producer. So that is what happened. The combination of the impossible contract and Hudson's interference made an agreement impossible. After the second episode of Season 8, Shirley Feeney simply vanished from the show. The plot stated she had packed up all her belongings and moved overseas in the space of a couple of hours while Laverne was at a dance contest. No goodbye episode. No proper farewell. Just gone. The way the show handled Williams' departure was jarring for audiences. And the fallout was immediate. Penny Marshall was left standing in front of studio audiences being asked what happened to Cindy. She later called it a drag. Without Shirley, the show had lost its heart and ABC canceled it entirely just one season later. And then came the lawsuit. Cindy Williams and Bill Hudson sued the production for $20 million, claiming wrongful termination and breach of contract. The case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Williams later noted that in the years following her departure, she noticed that more and more television shows were building nurseries on sets and providing nannies for their stars. Her situation had quietly changed the industry, even if nobody ever gave her credit for it. For years after the show ended, Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams barely spoke. They saw each other occasionally at TV Land specials and anniversary events, but these meetings were brief and in crowds. They never sat down and had the real conversation that needed to happen. That conversation finally came over a decade later when Marshall learned through castmate David Lander that Williams had separated from Bill Hudson. Marshall reached out. Williams was finishing a stage production at the time. But when the play ended, the two women finally sat down together at Marshall's house and talked. Really talked. About the show. About the pregnancy. About the years of silence. About how much they had missed each other. Marshall later wrote that the conversation was one she wished she had been able to have 15 years earlier. They mended their friendship completely. And in 2013, they reunited on screen together, playing feuding ex-television partners on an episode of the Nickelodeon series Sam and Cat. When a reporter asked if the role had any similarities to their real relationship, Williams smiled and said the headlines had always been overblown. Now let us talk about the secret that David Lander kept hidden for 15 years. Because this is the part of the Laverne and Shirley story that most people do not know. And it is perhaps the most heartbreaking chapter of all. In May 1984, 1 year after Laverne and Shirley went off the air, David Lander walked into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles and received a diagnosis that would change his life forever. Multiple sclerosis, a progressive neurological disease with no cure that attacks the central nervous system and slowly deteriorates the body's ability to function. He was 36 years old. For the next 15 years, David Lander told almost nobody. Not his castmates. Not his comedy partner Michael McKean, who had been his closest friend since they were teenagers at Carnegie Mellon. Not the producers who hired him. Not the directors he worked for. Just his wife, his daughter, and a couple of the closest friends in his inner circle. Think about what that means for a moment. David Lander spent 15 years going to auditions, performing on sets, doing voiceover work, appearing in major Hollywood films, playing baseball announcer in Penny Marshall's own film A League of Their Own, all while managing a progressive neurological disease that was slowly affecting his body. Every single day was a performance within a performance. Every time he walked onto a set, he was not just playing a character. He was also performing the role of a healthy man. One producer cast him in a play in Chicago without ever having met him, having confused him with Michael McKean. When Lander showed up, the producer was visibly disappointed. The play was intensely physical with a lot of props to manage on stage, and Lander had no rehearsal time. He pushed through. He always pushed through. But the combination of the physical demands and late nights out with the show's producer eventually became too much. He was let go from the production with the excuse that he had a drinking problem. He did not have a drinking problem. He had multiple sclerosis that nobody knew about. And in the cutthroat world of Hollywood in the 1980s and 1990s, Lander, had calculated that the only way to survive was to keep his diagnosis completely secret. As he later said himself, Hollywood is merciless. Any defect and the jackals will rip you apart. In 1999, 15 years after his diagnosis, David Lander finally went public. He gave a headline interview to People magazine. He became a goodwill ambassador for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. He spoke at conventions and events around the country, sharing his story to help others living with the disease. In 2002, he published his autobiography titled Fall Down Laughing: How Squiggy Caught Multiple Sclerosis and Didn't Tell Nobody. The book became a beloved account not just of his illness but of his extraordinary career and his lifelong friendship with Michael McKean. McKean's reaction when he finally learned the truth about his oldest friend's diagnosis was one of the most moving moments of this entire story. He later said he was Lander's oldest friend, that they had watched his physical deterioration over time. But he said that nothing upstairs deteriorated, that Lander was as funny as he always was until the very end. He called him the funniest man he ever knew. David Lander died on December 4, 2020 at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 73 years old. He had battled multiple sclerosis for 37 years. His family asked that fans remember him for all the laughter he brought into the world. And what about the show itself? What was the legacy of Laverne and Shirley? Because beyond all the drama and the secrets and the feuds and the illness, there was something genuinely historic about what Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams created together. At a time when women on American television were almost always shown as wives, mothers, or love interests, Laverne and Shirley were something completely different. They were independent. They worked for a living. They paid their own rent. They chased their own dreams. They failed and got back up and failed again and got back up again. They were not waiting to be rescued. They were two working-class women trying to build a better life and making each other laugh along the way. The show was groundbreaking in ways that its audience perhaps did not even fully realize at the time. Cindy Williams later said something about the show that has stayed with fans ever since. She said that people did not want to admit they loved Laverne and Shirley, that they had a lot of closet viewers, rock stars, intellectuals, people who would never in a million years seem like they would be fans. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band came to watch a rehearsal one day, because the show in its own way was very hip. It was working class. It was real. And it was funny in a way that very few things on television have ever managed to be before or since. Penny Marshall died on December 17, 2018. She was 75 years old. Cindy Williams died on January 25, 2023. She was also 75. Michael McKean is still working to this day, with one of the most celebrated careers of any actor from that era, including his Emmy-nominated role on Better Call Saul. And the show itself lives on in reruns and streaming, beloved by generations of American viewers who never even saw it when it first aired. The real story of Laverne and Shirley is not the feud. It is not the lawsuit. It is not even the secret illness. The real story is that two broke women with nothing but talent and a friendship between them somehow ended up creating one of the most watched television programs in American history. And that friendship, despite everything, endured. If this video gave you the full story of one of television's most beloved shows, please share it. Subscribe for weekly videos uncovering the shocking secrets and untold truths behind the celebrities America grew up loving. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite Laverne and Shirley moment? I want to read every single one. See you in the next video.